Why do your relationships suck? Let's talk about that. So why do your relationships suck? We're going to explore that today. So something that I really want to outline from the outset here is a concept that I've mentioned a little bit historically, but I'm going to talk about hopefully as clear as possible here today. So something that's really, really important for good and healthy relationships is something called empathy. So you might have heard of empathy before. If you haven't, here's a quick rundown of what empathy is. So empathy is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to really see their world and their experience. So what does that mean? If, for example, you get up in the kitchen and you kick the table and your foot hurts like hell, and you're jumping around, you're like, oh, this hurts so much. If somebody sees you and they're with you and they're like, oh, that looks really painful, that must hurt, that's kind of an empathetic response, because that person's looking at the world through your lens and the pain you just went through when you stubbed your toe on the damn table. Sympathy, which is often the opposite of empathy, is to not really feel that pain with you, but instead kind of comment at it from afar and go, oh, yeah, well, you were stupid, weren't you? Like, I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry that happened to you, right? That's very sympathy. That often feels patronizing in my experience and not helpful for relationships. So if you want to have better relationships, why do you need to have empathy? Because to connect with somebody else, you need to understand or want to understand, and this is the key part. You don't have to entirely understand, but you're going to have to want to understand what someone else is going through, because otherwise you're not going to connect on similar ground. So we'll go back to the example before. If I can see you stub your toe, and I can empathize with you stubbing your toe, and I go, that really hurts. Oh, fucking hell, that must have hurt. Then you're going to feel a little bit understood by me, right? That's going to create a bit of social cohesion, a bit of social glue. We're on the same page, feeling the same thing. That connects people, okay? Another case that we see all the time, actually, in the modern day, is something we refer to as trauma bonding, right? Where two people have had really unfortunate, painful, deeply scarring experiences, and they share those intense emotions with each other, and they really understand each other, and they connect very deeply. But often that can create an intense dynamic in the relationship, which can make it very reactive, you might say. So, for example, if I shared trauma with you about my existence, and you shared trauma with me, if we kind of set the baseline for just sharing trauma the whole time, and we don't negotiate collaboratively how we're going to be outside of this intensity, it can feel quite overwhelming to interact, right? If you've ever felt that with somebody, I felt this, you go out on a night out and you have some drinks and you tell some random person your deep personal secrets, but then the next time you see them, you're kind of uncomfortable and embarrassed because you shared more than you felt like you should have, but also now they've kind of seen the real you, and there's an intensity that's been set up in the precedent for that relationship. So you're if I see them again and I engage with them, I'm gonna have to address that really intense thing that I shared, and I'm in a different state now where I can't or don't want to talk about that because it's uncomfortable, and I'm a different person now than I was when I had 12 beers. And this is a normal human experience. And outside of these examples, when you are trying to improve relationships that suck, it's often because you've built up a context between the two of you that's kind of hey, when we come together, a certain environment happens between us, right? So if you meet up with, you bump into somebody and they always do something that annoys you, when you see them, you're gonna be annoyed, right? So when you're annoyed, you're gonna be less able to be empathetic, less able to slow down, less able to understand their experience, or even want to, because they're like, screw this guy sucks, right? And that's going to create like an inherent rift in that relationship where you're never going to see things on the same page. You're never going to be able to extend the empathy to them, which is never going to help them extend the empathy to you. And then you're never going to be able to get on the same page where you can clearly you feel like you can directly communicate with people. I see this all the time in some unhealthy relationship dynamics and what I've seen, especially in families. This happens so much in families where there's so much history between you and the other people in your family. You could default to these old ways of being, and then it's really hard to feel like you can give certain concessions because of things that happened historically. It's very normal, right? If your like parents sucked at a certain point or whatever. So, if you relate to any of this, what do you do about this, right? Especially when you've got a relationship that sucks so hard. Like, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's a co-worker, right? What do you do? Empathy. That's a really helpful place to start. If they don't like you, they're probably going to push back on this and probably maybe make fun of you or not like it. But the power play here is to continue doing it regardless. So stand your empathetic ground and use some active listening skills. I would encourage that. If you do not know what those are, I will give you a really brief rundown of those. So active listening skills comprise of a few elements. We have the open-ended question. So there are two main types of questions when we are talking to somebody. The close-ended question, which you can only answer with a yes or no. Do you want cheese? Yes or no. An open-ended question is a question that often starts with what, why, when, how, where, when, at the start of these questions. So that encourages people to say more than yes or no. How would you like your cheese? They can't say yes or no to how would you like your cheese. So the real art to impactful empathy in relationships is to really have great questions. And you can only have those questions if you use this other skill, which I refer to as, a lot of people call it active listening. I call it reflective listening. So to come back to the cheese example, if I were to reflective listen to myself, I would say, so it sounds like, well, you're really thinking about cheese a lot right now. Cheese is coming up for you a lot as we talk here. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Acknowledging people directly and verbally and acknowledging what they're saying and putting out is actually really important to have an honest, open dialogue of communication, right? You'll see this used in empathy coaching, which I do. You'll see this in therapy. It's a very common technique as well. And it's used a lot to ground how we feel about each other in the now, right? It's to encourage each other to be more honest about how we feel, because a huge, important part of improving relationships is to reduce how many lies there are in the relationship. If you're like me, there's a lot of things you struggle to say to people because it might be taken as kind of mean and rude, right? And that makes a lot of relationships suck because that decreases the amount of space you can take up as a person, right? Until you're just stuck in these vague, specifically in my context, British kind of phrases that don't really mean anything because the relationship has no space to say anything honest, right? Because we don't expect honest, especially in small talk, we don't expect like people to be honest, right? But especially in relationships we care about, when we've gone down certain roads before and faced rejection in some way or another, it can be really hard to be honest. And when we can't be honest with others, we pull back from relationships. That makes relationships suck. So if you use listening skills, it can be a great way to give the other person space to feel understood, which is a good place to start. But as you might have experienced if you've ever used these skills before and it's not worked, you can really run into a situation where you are giving a lot. You're giving people space, you're giving people empathy, you're listening to them, you're asking really helpful questions, and they still are just taking. They're just taking, right? So that's really hard. Those relationship situations are really tough, and that relationship sucks. But what I would encourage you to do about that is to create a bit of awareness in the interactions you have, and then really ask the question to them, like, what are we doing here in this relationship? Like, and like, people don't like this, people hate this, people worm away from this. You got to be ready for this. But people worm away from readdressing the relationship as it is now, because we build relationships many years ago based on who we were then and what we kind of were to each other relative to the situation we were in, right? You made friends with people in school, and you did those things with those friends in school, and then maybe you made some friends with people in college or university, and that set up certain relationships based on what you liked then. And then maybe you got your first job as an adult, and maybe you made some friends with your co-workers then, and you were in your early 20s, mid-20s, and you had a certain set of way of being then. And now maybe you're in your 30s, like me, and you're different again. You've got to address these relationships head on, because if you don't, they're gonna suck. They're gonna feel exhausting. Okay? So just being like, hey man, like I notice a change in the relationship. Like, what are you seeing? How do you feel about this? And if they're unwilling to acknowledge that, or they feel like they're the same, maybe that demonstrates that you've changed and they haven't. And there's no clear-cut way of navigating that, right? It could be maybe that relationship's to move on from. Maybe there's some work to be done there together. Help each other out, man. Help people grow. But also don't do it to the detriment of yourself. But those are some reasons why your relationships might suck. I'm going to leave it there. Thunderhawk Coaching. If you want coaching from myself to better understand this in even more detail, links are in the description below. Check it out. My website's there. Send me an email if you want to talk about this. Consultations are free. You get a whole hour with me. You don't give me a penny. 50 minutes. To see if we're a good fit, because I think it's really important to figure that stuff out. But if you made it this far in the video, I appreciate you. I love you. I've been Will. You've been wonderful. Take care. See you in the next one.